Welcome to JCT TV. These are interviews and Bible teachings for the 21st century. So friends, you're in for a treat today. So am I actually, because I am delighted to be able to interview my firstborn, Todd, who is a pastor, and he's also a television producer, and he's an author. And he's a tremendous young guy who's really doing a great job with his local congregation and trying to reach his world. We're also going to continue with our Bible study in the book of Matthew. So this should be a half hour well spent. Don't go away.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
As I mentioned off the top, friends, it's not often I get a chance to sit down and interview my firstborn. But that's exactly what I'm doing. Todd Cantelon is going to be my guest not only today, but for all four programs out of the five this month. And it's just a delight for me personally. And welcome, Todd.
Thank you, sir.
We have a lot we can talk about. I'd like to start from your growing up in Jerusalem, Israel. Not a lot of kids grew up in Jerusalem, Israel. Mm-hmm. It's a fresh memory for you. You've been back several times.
Yeah.
When you think back, you had no idea when we moved there. You were only about 7, what you were facing. You had to learn a new language. Mm-hmm. You had to learn a new culture. It was just a total upset in your life. Were you upset?
We're 6.5, I think, right? You turned 7 in Israel.
You turned 7 in Israel, that's right.
So not quite 7.
Yeah.
I don't remember being upset then. I was upset when we left Israel when I was 14. But at 6.5, I was excited to get on an airplane. Yeah. Had I flown before that, or was that the first time? I don't remember.
No, I think that was your first time. Your brother Jess had his 5th birthday on that flight,
on
as
the
I
airplane.
recall.
Yeah,
I remember the crew came down with a birthday.
I do remember.
They were able to have flames on candles in those days.
That's crazy. Half the plane was smoking, so.
That's true.
Hello.
You know what used to kill me about the smoking, non-smoking was you had a section. Yeah. This is the non-smoking, this is the smoking. If you had the misfortune of sitting right at the divide.
Yeah. It's 1981. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
1981.
So I wasn't upset. I was excited. I remember it was a big 747 jumbo jet. I thought it was pretty cool. You know, when you're little, you're just not aware of how weird it is. I often think about your and Mom's perspective on it. I mean, I remember that first Christmas and no Christmas tree. We had a little plant, because we didn't know if you can even get Christmas trees.
Yeah, we
in
put
Israel.
some lights on a rubber tree.
Sure, I remember no fridge. So I remember Mom keeping the stuff out on the windowsill. You know, sometimes when I think into some of the things that drove me in my early adult years, I can see that the dislocation of that experience had an effect on me for sure. At the time, though, no, I didn't.
You know, you mentioned your mom, and she's a remarkable woman, as everybody knows who knows her. But yeah, for the first 4 or 5 months, we had to order a fridge, we had to order a car, we had to order appliances. We eventually did have a fridge. We didn't have a television, as you may recall, for the first few years in Jerusalem.
Well, and we were waiting for the barrels to come with all of our worldly goods.
Shipped their stuff in barrels, 45-gallon drums.
I still remember staying at the Plaza Hotel. How long were we there for?
We were there for a month.
I was going to say a month or 2 months. Yeah. What's wonderful about it is I often stay at that hotel when I'm back in Israel. My wife and I are taking a tour to Israel in 2020, and we're going to stay at the Plaza because I said I'm only going to stay here. I like it so much. It's it's many years later, but it still feels like home to me. So it's funny how these little moments stick with us.
I remember we were having breakfast one time, at the plaza, just the second weekend or whatever, and this lovely older fella came over to us. We had noticed him there for a few days. He was there obviously on a tour. He was a retired pediatrician. And he said, "Excuse me, sir, I don't want to be rude, but I just have to say something. You've got the 3 best behaved kids I've ever seen."
In the whole country.
And you know, that was an interesting aspect of your cultural shift.
Sure.
Because as you began to interact with going to school in Hebrew, I mean, all the kids spoke Hebrew. We'll talk about that in a minute. Israeli kids behave differently.
The biggest change for me was having to increase my aggression level.
Yeah.
Seriously, and it's funny, you know, my wife is doing her master's in psychotherapy right now, so she's doing a lot of study on personality and why we are the way we are, and when we began to develop that trait. And on a certain type of personality typing system, I'm the most aggressive type that exists.
Right.
So there's 9
I
types
find that
in the
hard
system.
to believe.
I know, so I'm the most aggressive type. And of course, they say that you typically form these personality characteristics, and you're not all one thing, but the dominant thing that you are. And a lot of that comes from they talk about some event in your childhood, sometimes traumatic, sometimes not, that really kind of forms the way you are. And so for me, for sure, Israeli kids will eat you alive.
Yeah.
And I remember within the first 2 weeks in grade 2, so I'm grade 2, just a little kid. I remember you walking me to school for the first time. I remember crying as I walked away, but still walking into the school. You know, I had to go find the principal for myself. She was waiting for me, but you know, very formative stuff at 7 years of age. And I remember those kids, they showed me no mercy, you know, in the first few weeks. And so I immediately had to kind of resolve to either fight or get eaten alive. And so as I look back, certainly much of my aggressiveness, that's tempered, of course, as you get older. You get beat up by life, you suffer a lot more. You're not as, you know, not as all one thing as you were when you were younger, but certainly as a young man, that aggressiveness is definitely Israeli. I mean, Israeli kids are raised to be self-sufficient, are raised to be independent, to speak their minds, to attack first, ask questions later.
I've often said to your mom, I wonder if there is even one Israeli kid in Israel who is insecure.
Yeah, it's funny, in recent years, I mean, the more you study the history of the formation of the state of Israel, it's funny because, you know, the joke is Israeli kids are out of control, and we can say that's people who love Israel and love Israeli kids and have many Israeli kids who grew up to be our friends as adults. That said, that kind of kibbutznik idea of let the kids run wild, so much of that comes out in a response, or out of a response to the many, many tens of thousands of children who were massacred in the Holocaust.
Sure.
And in the years before that, in the pogroms of Russia, and in the general persecution that Jewish people dealt with, you know, in continental Europe throughout their history post AD 70, there really was in the state of Israel a conscious decision made to let these children live. And then also the reality, of course, that you all had to serve in the army, and in the early stages of the state of Israel, high likelihood that, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5 of those little boys especially are going to end up dead before the age of 30. Well, let them live now. So that bred that.
Well, your mom and I were young parents there, and we had a lot of Israeli young parent friends, as you know. We had a lot of Israeli friends. And we would talk about these things because our children were about the same age and so on. And they would say, look, we let them run wild because the Army's going to discipline them.
Yeah.
And the Army does discipline them.
For sure.
And then it was interesting, so many of these young couples who were friends of ours, they would have a couple of children and then maybe 8, 9, 10 years later have another 2, almost like 2 separate families. And we asked some of them, and we always got the same answer. Well, you know, Jim, we might to lose one of them in the war.
Yeah.
I was thinking, how pragmatic is that? But in terms of running wild, and that has an implication maybe that is negative. In terms of having free reign, let's put it that way, or a free range child, let's put it that way, free range, which is a big hit these days, free range children. You were pretty free range in Jerusalem.
Well, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but running wild is definitely what I did. I mean, I think math was never my strong suit once we moved back to North America, because all of grade 5 in Israel, I was at the gymnasia, so this would have been grade 6. Grade 6, grade 7. All of grade 7 at the Gymnasia, which is the main high school in downtown Jerusalem, my classroom kind of sat at the edge of the corner of 2 walls. So there was one building here and then the corner of the wall there. And I happened to sit next to the window, and it's Israel, of course, there's no screens on the windows. And of course, right near the jut of the wall, the downspout happened to be right next to my window. So our teacher would turn her back, and I would literally jump out the window, grab the downspout, shimmy down 2 stories, and play basketball, and then climb back up and wait for her to turn her back and jump back in. So, and this was me and my friends. And so whether or not she knew it, who knows? But
she knew it for sure.
Yeah, but they're like, "En malasot, what are you going to do?"
En malasot.
So I mean, it really was a seize life by the horns, really a culture. One of my best friends lived in the Jewish Quarter, and so his parents would just let us go. I mean, to think of it these days, let your kids run through the old city of Jerusalem. We would often do it on the roofs.
Yeah.
We would go from roof to roof to roof, literally leaping over streets.
Yeah.
It was definitely a taste, death, live life kind of life, to quote my brother Jess.
You had a pretty moving experience as a young boy. I forget how old you were when you participated in the Yom HaShoah.
Oh, sure.
Yom HaShoah means Holocaust Day, which happens once a year. The memorial for the Holocaust at Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial, which is world famous. And you were a part of a choir in the Hall of Remembrance, where there is an eternal flame and total silence. Tell us about that.
I think it was either grade 4 or 5. I don't remember which year it was, but I was in the choir, and our choir was nationally ranked. And that year we won the Israeli National School Children's Choir Competition, and so the reward was to sing at Yom HaShoah at Yad Vashem. So they took us down onto the floor of the Hall of the Eternal Flame, and we got to sing. And of course, at the time, I had no idea. I was a good singer. I don't remember how good a singer, but I could sing. I'm sure I wasn't the best, but my teacher chose me to sing the opener of the song, which happened to be the lament for the Jewish lament for the dead, sung in Polish. And of course, I had long blonde hair, blue-eyed. I mean, if you want to type an Aryan type, at the time I looked that way very much. So I'm sure the choir master knew exactly what she was doing to have this little child who looks like a German stand at the front of a choir of Israelis and begin the Polish lament for the dead.
In front of the president, in front of the 2 chief rabbis, in front of the cabinet members, in front of all of the leaders of Israel.
Yeah, and also of the U.S. Remember, George Shultz was there.
George Shultz was there, right.
So, and I think George H.W. Bush was there as well. So yeah, it was tremendously powerful. Even as a little boy, I realized this was something special.
I think that they were deliberate in choosing you.
For sure.
I mean, you're the only blonde in the choir, but you're also maybe the only Christian in the choir.
Oh, for sure.
And you sang in Polish.
Yeah, just the opening part. And again, even though I had no agency in that decision, looking back, I can see why they would make that decision, and I feel privileged to have been part of it. It was certainly a significant moment.
In terms of speaking Polish, you learned to speak Hebrew very early on.
Yeah.
You were forced to because all your friends were Hebrew speakers, but you also had a tremendous principal.
Yeah, Yafa.
Yafa.
Yeah.
She took you under her wing.
Well, I mentioned the first day where you dropped me off and I walked in and you told me I have to ask for Yafa. And so literally as I walked in the door, I remember the office.
By the way, why did I do that?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
Why didn't I walk in with you and introduce you to Yafa?
Probably turning me into a self-made man.
Hey, there you go. I wasn't being hard, but I knew that. And the fact that you got teary but still walked to the school, I'll never forget, because as you walked with tears that way, I walked with tears this way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old school that is in terms of parenting approach.
Yeah.
That certainly wouldn't be the norm today.
No.
I don't know if it even would have been the norm then. But it definitely had a profound impact on me.
And Yafa, she gave you about an hour a day.
Well, she was waiting for me. I walked in the door, she was waiting for me right there, and she gave me the first, hour or two of every day. For the first 3 months, it was just me and her upstairs, one-on-one, teaching me Hebrew from scratch.
Our time for this segment is over. Next week, friends, we'll continue with this very interesting discussion with Todd Cantelon. We have a lot to talk about. This guy's a pastor, he's a TV producer, he's an author. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We'll be back with our Bible teaching segment right after this break.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, working for orphans and widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To connect with us, you can call us at 1-800-969-9551, or you can visit us online at wowmission.com.
Now, as I said when we started Matthew 24, I'm going to take as much time as I got to take. Mind you, I've been doing that with all of Matthew, haven't I? We've been in this now this is our second season, I think, in Matthew, maybe our third. I lose track. But I like to take time because it's not often that any of us get the opportunity just to kind of slowly digest the scriptures. And the Gospels are certainly the place to start, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In fact, I would say Matthew, Mark, Luke / Acts, because Acts is volume 2 of Luke and John. So I'm just taking the time. No apologies, just taking the time. Now, you'll remember, let's just go back here. Let's see. We'll go the other way. Well, back in verse 3, let me just read it from my Bible here. The disciples had asked Jesus, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? This, of course, is the big question. And from the time of the disciples to now, that's always interested people. What's the timetable? What's happening? What's going to happen? And Jesus gives a pretty comprehensive answer, but his answer is always couched in the fact that one should not be setting dates. Only the Father knows. He's quick to tell his disciples. He said, even I don't know right now. Only the Father knows, and so don't be setting dates and getting dogmatic and then getting disappointed. Unfortunately, throughout the centuries, a lot of people have not listened to that word of wisdom from the Lord and have set dates. You've read about it, you've heard about it, people, dressing in white robes and going up to the top of a mountain, expecting, the return of Jesus on a certain, beautiful morning. And they always come down the mountain disappointed, disgruntled, sometimes disenchanted, and then some of them just ultra-rationalizing why it wasn't that day the Lord returned, even though they'd been hyping it for 2 years or more. Well, I don't want to get into that. I'm not interested in setting dates. I'm not interested in reading things into some of these words of Jesus. But there's enough here to give you a kind of a ballpark in terms of what to expect, in terms of the general context of the end of days. And that's the approach I'm going to take. So last time we got into some of what he said in the early part of chapter 24. And we were just about to pick up verse 14, which to me is a critical remark from Jesus. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world, okay, in all the world, as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, just a few things for us to understand here. Jesus was Jewish. The disciples were Jewish. Almost everybody that Jesus encountered in the course of his 3 years of ministry was Jewish. Now, mind you, I got to say this too. Most of Jesus' ministry was in the Galilee. And Galilee was referred to in the scriptures as Galilee of the Gentiles, rightly so, because at that time, during the Roman occupation, you had Bet-Shan, which we call it today, I think was Scythopolis, which is a major urban center just south of the Sea of Galilee. You had Jericho. Although it was on the edge of Perea, it was sort of at the very southern limit of Galilee, if you can say that. And then going further into Judea, Jerusalem, you had Sepphoris up near Cana. These were all major urban areas, and they were all basically populated by Gentiles. There were Jews there, of course, but mainly Gentiles. And certainly the Upper Galilee, where Capernaum was, where Jesus basically had his adopted hometown, I think the Gentiles may have outnumbered the Jews 2-1, or maybe even 3-1. So it wasn't as though Gentiles, did not encounter Jesus and Jesus encountered Gentiles. In fact, we read about him, healing Gentiles from time to time and ministering to Gentiles from time to time. Having said that, Jesus was Jewish, the disciples were Jewish, and the expectation of his disciples and the Jewish people who heard Jesus was, pardon me, that he would, if he were the Messiah, would establish a throne in Jerusalem as a Jewish monarch and would rule the world. Now, the Jews understood that all the world meant more Gentile than Jew. The Jewish people were definitely in the minority, and boy, did they know it under Roman occupation. I mean, they lived in a Mediterranean culture that had been for centuries Greek. In fact, Greek, Koine Greek, as it's called, everyday common Greek, was probably the current language of the time. And there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus could speak Greek. Maybe his native language was Aramaic. There's probably some Hebrew thrown in there too. But, they understood that all the world was Gentile, okay? But they had an exclusive view as it related to the kingdom, okay? And so the gospel of the kingdom was something that, if you will, was specially the province of Jewish faith. That's how they saw it. And, of course, it was something that had to be preached. Preaching, it wasn't just the Jews who were used to preaching. The rabbis would preach all the time. But in the Greek culture, for sure, preachers or public speakers were highly regarded. There was a great value placed on public dissertation, public philosophers, public prophesiers, and some of the more public and the more popular of these preachers were given very healthy stipends for the work that they did. So, preaching was not an unusual thing for them, but it was unusual to think in terms of Gentiles having anything to do with this gospel of the kingdom, okay? Ooh, look at all the colors I have here. Wow. All the world as a witness to all the nations, then the end will come. Why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. One being that it was indicating to these, his Jewish disciples that Jesus, who was Jewish and would be the Jewish Messiah, nevertheless had a message for the world. It had been prophesied in the Old Testament that Israel would be a light to who? Other Jews? No, to the nations. There was always an international component to who they were, to their calling, if you will, as a nation. God chose them to be, if you will, the representative, the mouthpiece, the spokesperson, the communicator, the marketer, whatever term you want to use, for the kingdom of heaven, to the world. Because God so loves the world. He just doesn't love, Israel. He loves the world. From John 3:16. He gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in him should not perish. Okay. So what Jesus is telling the disciples here is that there is a universal component here to what he's talking about, especially as it relates to the end of days. And when we talk Old Testament prophecy, certainly it's true, and we see it reflected again and again in the New Testament. Sometimes Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel would have something on this layer that was related to the current situation. But at the same time, there was another layer that had application to another generation, and some that had a relationship to something that would happen 2,000 years later. And they don't delineate it, but they're not linear in their thinking. Kind of like quantum theory, you can have one thing in two places at the same time. Kind of hard to understand. But there was a multi-level aspect to prophecy in the Old Testament, and you see it reflected even here in the words of Jesus. And I'll explain that a little later. When the gospel is preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, then the end will come. Which means that there has to be some kind of an expectation of a passage of time in history, because it's going to take a long time to get the gospel to all the nations, right? That's a very significant point that must not be forgotten. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, and next time we're going to pick it up with verse 15 of 24 when we talk about chaos in Judah. And believe me, friends, there was lots of chaos to come. If you've read Josephus's War of the Jews, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Friends, as you know, Jim Cantelon has been offering Cantelon's Casual Commentary as a Bible study supplement to his ongoing exposition of St. Matthew's Gospel on JCT TV. He's excited to offer Volume 4, which completes the Matthew study. The Transfiguration, Triumphal Entry, Crucifixion, and Resurrection of Jesus Christ are all covered in this volume. Like the first 3 volumes, it's concise, captivating, and casual. To order your copy, you can call, write, or go online. Write to Jim Cantelon today, Post Office Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or call us at 519-415-8341. You can also order online at jimcantelontoday.com. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 4, and for a gift in any amount, it will be sent to you. When you place your order, also consider becoming a monthly partner. Remember, your gifts help us build this ministry.
In the body of the show, friends, you see these promos for WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. This is what my wife and I, Kathy, and many people that we've recruited over the years, both here and in Africa, have been doing for 19 years. We care about orphans and widows in their distress, James 1:27. And JCT is now the spokesman for WOW. We want you to support WOW. And as you support WOW, WOW will cover the modest expense of getting this program out to you, okay? So I'm not asking for you to support JCT, I'm asking you to support WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. Kathy and I will be there 3-4 times a year. As I'm recording this program right now, we'll be gone in a couple of days for India and East Africa, South Africa, West Africa. We've got so much happening there, and we really do appreciate your prayer support and your financial support. When you want it, ask for Cantelon's Casual Commentary. We're happy to send it to you in 4 parts. But just keep us in mind, especially in your prayer. See you again next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.